Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Greene, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right. Well, I am super happy to be sitting here with my friend and colleague, Nicolette De Saint Amour. And Niki and I are fellow students at the Kelowna Feldenkrais Professional Training Program. Kelowna is a city in central British Columbia, and Feldenkrais is a method of somatic education. And so we met there, and we're joining hand in hand in learning the method. Niki is based in San Diego now, although she has been in, as we'll hear, she has global influences due to growing up in many different parts of the world. But I thought it would be awesome, Niki, just to sit down and have a conversation around what drew us into Feldenkrais and some of the things that we are learning and coming alive for us as we explore. But then as I've gotten to know you, you're just your own. I'm always interested in people's stories that have led them into embodiment work. And I think of you as having a unique and interesting path. And so I just love to chat about all of those things today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Alex, and coming and talking about this work that we're in the realm of somatics and human development. So for me, my journey was very much centered around movement. I've been teaching movement for over 10 years, different methods. I've taught yoga and was very much more interested in yoga. Anything mind body was very much of interest to me. And along the years, I've tried to implement more of a sense of introspective practice throughout. For me, that was very important in movement and how I felt I got to know myself better, and particularly in those formative years I felt in my late teens and early 20s, and I had done a training in yoga. But how I actually came into that was that I was also working as a tea consultant. So a lot of Eastern practice influenced me and into that realm of getting to movement.
Well, yeah. So take us back in time a little bit. So I don't even remember all the, you were kind of an international student. At some point you arrived in New York, maybe in your late teens, something like that. Is that when your sort of yoga and embodiment journey began, or were there some roots of that in your childhood, or how did it?
Yeah. So, I grew up, my mother's from Mozambique, my dad is American and worked in NGO work. So we lived 3-4 years in many different countries, particularly in the African continent. And so I felt that kind of upbringing created a quality of adaptability in me, and also being able to see many different ways of living, many different ways of life. And so, but maybe there's, of course, this kind of moving and adapting and all of this probably didn't give me as much grounding as needed in formative years. So it was really, moved to New York around the age of 8 after living in Haiti, and left New York around 15, back to the African continent and finished school there. And after graduating, continued to move around and explore. And I was studying at the Academy of Arts in San Francisco, but left that and felt that I wanted to go into movement. I'd been living in Dominican Republic and I was surfing and doing Pilates, and I mean, to sense myself in this way, to use myself in this way, I wasn't really quite sure what I was onto, but it felt that there was some part of me that in a way had a structure when I never really thought about that kind of thing before. And I had gone back to New York maybe around the age of 22, and I was starting to work in tea, and that was also very interesting to me.
So what is a tea consultant? Is it somebody who sells tea?
Yes,
finds
yes,
new tea? What's the life of a tea consultant like?
Yeah, so I tried many different types of tea, all from Japan to China to India, and for me, the natural world is just as important to me in my what I find valuable in living. I felt tea is in a way a process of taking this quiet time or moment to reflect, and you see that in tea ceremony and all of this. Really got into the Tao Te Ching and this kind of art of living. So this kind of started to emerge in my thinking, that there is a kind of art to living and being. I then started to embark on yoga and felt much more this mind body stuff, and continued on with that, and later became trained in yoga. But as I went on, I just felt that so many studios I tried to work with were more interested in just some kind of illuminated sequencing and postures rather than the how. I was always very interested in the how. So I wasn't necessarily such a good fit for many studios because it was very much the time of power yoga and vinyasa and all of this kind of stuff.
That wasn't your jam.
That was not my jam. And I had later gone into working more gymnastic style movements, which is interesting in one's late 20s to go there, and building that kind of practice, more of the Ido Portal work kind of stuff, which is all locomotive. And it's almost interesting that I ended up doing Feldenkrais work, because maybe the Ido Portal stuff gave me a little bit more of this just kind of dynamic understanding of movement and how. But of course, that work can also be very, in a way, oh, I got this many muscle ups, or I'm acquiring this kind of skill set, and I place value in this, which
a little bit goal driven,
very goal driven. And it was still something I was not very interested in a way. Like, I want to be of service. If I'm only showing people I have this kind of skill set, or I have this kind of handstand, then it doesn't really benefit anyone. I think we see a lot of accounts like that on Instagram. Just like human tricks.
That's what half of my reels on Facebook and Instagram. I sort of like some of them. I see some amazing feats, but I know what you mean.
Human beings are amazing, and we do all these interesting things, but it's like it's just so. I mean, I find the Feldenkrais method so profound in the sense that it's so inclusive to everyone. It was really in the beginning of the COVID period. I had been working with Lavinia Plonka, and I found her workshop on the Shift Network. And the title was something like Reset Your Nervous System in 7 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, that sounds good, because I actually, throughout my 20s, I had...
Did you need a nervous system reset?
I
Were you
did
jonesing
terribly.
for a reset?
Yeah, I was jonesing for a reset. And you know how life in New York can be. It's very, you're on go all the time, right? It's like
Sure.
really like such, your nervous system is very full. Like, and so I had also experienced throughout my years anxiety, and that was brought on by vertigo. So I was having some vestibular challenges. And this was at the time I was teaching in Morocco and Casablanca, where these symptoms started to really like become quite chronic in a way. And so I found an acupuncturist. I was working with an osteopath there, and it helped the symptoms. But at the end of the day, there was something habitual about how my system was working and creating these reactions that it became almost like a panic disorder when the vertigo came on.
I see.
So yeah, so and you know, so I continued on with this kind of acupuncture and osteopathy, and things were better, but it still was, I could still sense that there was something in my nervous system that needed addressing. So when I saw that language for the Feldenkrais method, I was very interested in what that could look like.
What was the language? I mean, so you're right. I mean, Feldenkrais is definitely nervous system work. Are you talking about that 7-week reset? Was that Feldenkrais based?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
Yes. And so I was like, I almost thought this was always nervous system, but I never closely looked so much at the nervous system.
Okay.
As a means to change the system or way of being.
The body and sensation. And
yes. And it was really within one lesson, I could sense a total difference within how I sensed my nervous system. I almost didn't know it was possible. So I was very interested in the work. And by the end of the 7 weeks, I could sense profound shifts in myself. And I didn't give much thought to awareness or what attention could be. You know, I think we've been taught that awareness or this kind of thing is cultivated through sitting down and meditating and trying to find this kind of state of mind.
Sure.
Where this is a very tangible, concrete process to get to awareness.
Through movement. Yeah.
Through movement.
Yeah.
So it was very, very fascinating. I knew right away, this is what I want to be doing.
Wow. So you got the reset, the 7 weeks.
I got the reset in 7 weeks. And you know, in times before that, like I said, I was working, I did classes with Tom Myers. I was getting very interested in gait and structure and posture. And then I went on to study with Judith Austin a little bit and also more gait stuff. But again, like a lot of the stuff could feel maybe to me a little prescriptive, right? And where, you know, as we talked, in a way that I have to also address my emotional life. I also have to address the emotional life to also bring about changes that.
So that got you hooked. You said that was the beginning of the pandemic. Is that right? And so, and it wasn't soon. I mean, when did we begin our Kelowna training? Wasn't it in summer of 2020 or fall? Or no, maybe it was January 2021.
Yes. Yeah. So a year later, Lavinia announces, oh, there's a training in Kelowna, Canada. It's by the educational director is Julie Peck. I highly recommend. And
me too.
And I was like, dude, I want to go for this. And she's like, are you sure? It's a huge commitment. And I knew it's like I just know. And there was something there. I'm like, I've been a movement person, but there's something about this, that this is what I want. This is how I want to be of service, not teaching someone some kind of
To
handstand
do a
or
handstand or
yeah,
do
which is
30
all
muscle
great.
ups. Yeah.
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 But there's something here that could go inform your handstand, could go inform your run, but is even more practical to how it is I live my life.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, let's let's kind of riff on so I mean, to me, Feldenkrais is such an interesting modality because like you, I'm somebody who's studied and trained in a number of other things. And Feldenkrais it's a funny one to explain because to me, there's so much included in it. Like, yes, it's a system of movement therapy. But yes, but it's more than that. Moshe Feldenkrais was a scientist. He was a philosopher. And part of where you and I have connected has been on, the more that can arise from refining awareness of the body and the nervous system, et cetera. And we have to remember to talk about Alexander Lowen's books, by the way.
Yes, we have to.
Well, the sidebar that we'll come back to that. But yeah, like I don't know. Why don't we just talk a little bit? Because part of it is for some of our listeners will maybe have heard of Feldenkrais, but not know exactly what's in it. You've started to offer workshops. I'm going to be starting to offer workshops. Maybe we'll collaborate on a workshop. So we may as well sort of let's sort of lay the foundation of what are some of the basic ingredients that add up to the Feldenkrais method. And we'll just do some back and forth maybe, but I'll throw the baton to you.
Okay. I mean, there's so many different ways, right? When people are like, "What's Feldenkrais method?" There's two parts to the method. There's awareness through movement, which is the kind of group class movement part of the method, and then there's where you can work privately one-on-one in the realm of functional integration with the practitioner. Both offer, I think particularly what's happening is, or what's so profoundly different in the Feldenkrais method is that we're deeply interested in the sensory experience, and that sensory experience can rewire the brain. And it's through this kind of, that learning, Moshe was very interested in learning. He said, I chose movement, but I could do this with math, I could do this with other things, but that the nervous system best learns through movement, right? Those like most crucial learning years are in the early developmental years. So he uses movement and through this, the sensory experience. What's happening, I think, so what makes, to me, Feldenkrais teaching an art that one refines continually is that we're helping the person or facilitating the person to become more specific in their experience by asking questions that kind of spark the curiosity. We're working with the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the part that's curious.
Totally. Yeah. So I'm just going to add my 2 cents to what we've already shared. So, okay, let me just think for a second. So yeah, so I agree. So one thing that really stands out is that it's a learning paradigm rather than a fixing paradigm. So even though, it has results, a tangible neurophysiological change, but unlike, let's say, I mean, lots of things say that they are teaching rather than doing, like in Rolfing's structural integration. Any good structural integrationist would say, I'm teaching the body and the nervous system how to be in a new form, but that's only half true. You're also sort of like, manipulating the fascia and
you're bringing it there.
You're bringing it there. So And certainly clients perceive it as, hey, could you please get my posture corrected?
Mm,
Whether that's through Rolfing, whether that's through
mhm,
chiropractic.
mm,
Hey, you know how the body works. Please manipulate my body. Hopefully
mhm,
that will stay. So that's sort of like what I call the, fixing
mhm,
mindset, which,
mhm.
is pretty prevalent. We could have that
Yes.
in yoga or all kinds of things as
Mhm,
well. But Feldenkrais really chose a learning paradigm, and
mhm,
exactly as you say, this the best learners, or
mhm,
the most vigorous phase of learning is
mhm,
infant and child development, when the
mhm,
brain is just going crazy with
mhm,
neuronal development and
mhm,
whatnot. So
mhm,
it's like he got really interested in what are the conditions
mhm.
for that optimized learning in
Yes.
the neurological sense of the
Yes.
word. And
Mhm,
so the things that are unique are things like slowing things way down, taking
mhm,
the taking a goal off the table, and
mhm,
exactly what you said, the questions that
mhm,
a Feldenkrais teacher is inviting you to
mhm,
reflect
mhm,
as you're exploring. Those
mhm.
questions keep you in a learning mindset rather than a pushing
Yes.
or whatever it is. And the word you said, I think, the sensory awareness,
Mm,
and sometimes Moshe says,
mhm,
the kinesthetic feeling of
mhm,
movement,
mhm,
to me is another just massive piece of it. It's not just that we're moving. If you move so
mhm,
many times, it will, lubricate your synovial
mhm.
joints or mobilize. It's not that. It's
Yeah.
that you have to be there while the movement is happening with your
Yes.
appreciation. Does this feel more pleasurable? Am I
Mhm,
creating more of a sense of ease?
mhm.
Why is this a little sticky? Like that sort of ever-present curious awareness,
Yes.
I think, to me, is an essential ingredient of it. But so anyway, so those are what
Absolutely.
else? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the curiosity part. And it's almost like, right, these questions that, I remember in the beginning, I'm like, God, my mind wanders.
Mm, mm,
I noticed, like, I never really gave much thought to attention, right? It's like we have to also make the distinction between, well, and Krishnamurti makes this distinction in Life Ahead.
mm.
And Julie loves this quote, and it's actually what brought me to looking into Krishnamurti. Of course, Feldenkrais was a big
Well, I was going to ask
Krishnamurti.
about that too. So yeah, we'll
Yeah,
get to Krishnamurti as well. Yeah.
yeah. So he makes the distinction between concentration and attention.
Okay.
That concentration is almost like within this box, and
Okay.
attention is expansive, right? So, for me, like, oh, we've always been told to concentrate in school, I don't think we've really explored what attention could be.
Mm,
And so I'm there like, oh, I my attention, in a way, it drifts.
mm,
So I started to find, as I pay more attention, there's this quality of aliveness that feels profoundly human in my experience. I could sense myself. And
mm,
these questions also begin to arise. Like, how do I feel my spine? Or how did I do that? Am I doing that with my shoulder? That I become more like specific in my experiencing of myself, that I could attend to what my actual habitual patterns are. That
mm,
when stress or when difficulty arise, I don't contract. That we do these things to shorten ourselves all the time and not even know it. Jeff
mhm,
Haller uses biological fitness, which I love so much, that idea, but there's something innate within us, some kind of innate composure that we can go back to,
mm.
that is viable in our experience. That there is a quality of resiliency, which to me makes this method absolutely profound, that we have this rich inner resource we can go back to.
Yeah. Well, and I think that and I love your description of that process of, well, two things I love in that
Mhm.
nice comment there. One is about learning the attributes and the dimensions of attention, is such a valuable strength of the method. Attention is not one thing. There's different forms of it. But there's also this idea that that part of the self-awareness that arises in Feldenkrais method is, well, I guess the word we most often use is image, right? So image referring to your sort of conceptual construct of who you are and your embodiment and what's going on. And you gave a nice description of if you slow down and you pay attention in a detailed way, in a consistent way over time, you're starting to perceive at a level that's not the original habit. So starting to observe, when I do this, when I step, what's my shoulder blade doing? Which direction does my head slightly turn? What's happening with my breath? And I think in the beginning, at least when I've taught some people, and I've had this feeling myself, it almost feels a little bit like, oh, come on, like this is getting a little too granular. Like, why are we hyper fixating on what our rib cage is doing, or that our breath went a little bit out? But if you stay with it soon enough, you realize that opens a doorway into a greatly expanded, it's not just self-awareness of how your entire structure system is organizing and participating, but somehow that becomes the gateway for things getting more coordinated, more elegant and easeful, doing less of something unnecessary. So I think of it as a refinement kind of a paradigm as well.
Absolutely. Yes, I feel this. It's funny because we'll go away to a training session in Canada, and usually I don't do much of anything else besides, what we're doing in the training hall. So, and I primarily do jujitsu nowadays, and Feldenkrais himself was a judo black belt. So the method was very much inspired by judo and infant movement. So I find it to be such an interesting relationship with jujitsu. So I'll go away and then I'll come back home and train, and things are, you would think, oh, I haven't trained in 3 weeks, but I come back and I'm like, wow, something is even more refined. Something is even more elegant in my experiencing, or there's even more of a quality attention. And I could sense this, right? There's like this relationship, even what's happening in functional integration, if we really tap into it, is it's this, thinking not in words, and we're having this communication with two nervous systems. And that's also what's happening in jiu-jitsu, and the more we become more in tune with this deep listening within ourselves, which is what's happening throughout the process of the method, the more we can better relate to ourselves in the environment, right? So that kind of is as we were talking about, I think in the last segment, we were speaking a lot about functionality.
One thing I wanted to touch upon was, some of what drew me into the work. Well, I had heard of it, was on my radar when I studied structural integration in the way that I did. The founder of that style had also studied with Moshe, and so
I started reading.
Okay, good. All right, you got it. Yeah, great. Yeah. So Double E. He was a wild and crazy Mormon businessman.
Yes, fascinating individual.
Turned Rolfer, Feldenkrais person, and then later a Zen guy. So interesting life story. But so so on my radar through that, but not a sort of a deep dive. But somehow I got I think it was, the thing that really brought me back to it was Norman Doidge's book. What is it? The Brain's Way of Healing, I think is what it's called. And there's 2 chapters in there on the about neuroplasticity, because it wasn't known for sure at the time. I mean, Moshe Feldenkrais, very much ahead of his time, in the sense that his hypothesis was that our neuromuscular system learns in a particular way, and that but at that time, the belief system, neurophysiologists still believed that our brain was essentially fixed by the time we were, I don't know, 16, 18, 22, something like that. And we had very little neuroplasticity. But of course, the emerging science has really validated that, we retain neuroplasticity to just a tremendous degree, much more than previously thought. So anyway, so in Norman Doidge's book, there's a couple of chapters, and it's about how Feldenkrais method has been shown to just be super effective by modern standards. But he starts one of the chapters with an anecdote about Moshe's life that was so fascinating to me that it led me to sort of take a look at some of his books. And the anecdote was that, he grew up in Nazi occupied, I think, Poland. Jewish family, Orthodox education. And but for some reason, when he was a teenager, 13, 14, somewhere around there, he knew he needed to leave. Like he had heard of, Israel wasn't sort of fully defined as a state, but it was sort of, there was early it was kind of being pioneered. So when he was 13, he packed a bag. He took his math textbooks, because he was a mathematician, a pistol, and he started walking to Israel. And it took, I can't remember, 6-9 months, something like that. So he walked to Israel, left his family, and along the way attracted a collection of more than 100 youth. So he kind of started this sort of youth movement, and they all ended up in Israel, and they were sort of, and he worked in manual labor. There's a lot of construction, all of that. But to me, there was just something really fascinating about that origin story. What an unusual situation, not only to do that, but even just think about the charisma to sort of get other people to say, yeah, this is what we should be doing. But then when I looked closely, I mean, just what a fascinating character, because here he is, a scientist, physicist. He's doing work with Marie Curie and and stuff. And somehow he met, Jigoro Kano, the judo guy, and and even before that, he had developed some of his own sort of self-defense systems. So all these sort of threads coming together, it's such a fascinating life story. But then in his works, what I really appreciate is not only the tangibility of his method. Julie, our teacher, always makes the comment, part of Feldenkrais's gift was to do a sort of a deep learning around, the cutting edge neurophysiology stuff about the eyes, stuff about the vestibular system. But his gift was to take abstract things and then create lessons, what's called awareness through movement lessons in our work, that practically engage that. And so how to take the abstract, bring it into something experiential. So I love that dimension, the sort of really practical side of it, and it works. But also the sort of his philosophical bent, his questions about what it means to what it means to learn, what it means to and as you said earlier, he wanted to teach something, and he could have taught it in other ways, through art perhaps, or something, but he used movement as his medium. And I think it's important, this, we say awareness through movement. That's the name of Feldenkrais lessons. And I sometimes like to remind myself that it's, I get a little bit stuck on the movements when I'm trying to do something I can't do very well. But then what I'm reminded of is that it's, what am I trying to learn? I'm trying to learn awareness via movement. I'm not trying to learn movement through awareness. I'm trying to get awareness through movement. So to me, it's just sort of one of these areas where it takes me into a deeper place. And similar to, like you, when I studied martial arts, it wasn't so that I could defend myself. There was some higher principle I was trying to grasp. So,
Mhm.
so what about you when you kind of think, so that there's the, there's the feeling better in your body,
Mhm.
getting more, but then there's that something more. How do you think about that?
Um, I've been loving this quote by Fritz Perls that awareness alone can be curative. And it's simply that, right? Like you're saying, it's like, okay, it's not that the movements have to be like performed to perfection or this, but it's simply the vehicle to take us into awareness. And it's about getting more and more specific in your process of how it is you would tend to yourself. And I think, there's very little today that actually offers that kind of exquisite experience of attending to yourself in that way. To
Mm.
me, and to me, that then kind of, well, hopefully it then extends into your living, right? Because it's all self-relational. um
And
and
self-use.
yeah, the self-use that it makes, you know I mean, it's an art. I think this is an art. It's
Well
it's
said. Well said. Yeah.
it's an art, and as I think, in the time that Feldenkrais was there, along with his contemporaries of Ida Rolf and Alexander Technique and these different people, that I believe it was coming after the World Wars, where people were very much interested in the human experience.
Mm.
And during this time, we had Sigmund Freud's book, Ego and ID. And then there was Feldenkrais talking about, like, well, with his book, Body Image or Behavior, but in a way that he was telling Sigmund Freud that his ideas were a bit limited
Yeah.
in the to go to a person. And I believe Ida Rolf had the same sentiment as well, that if you change the structure of the person, the
Mm-hmm.
thinking can go along with it, the feeling, sensing, all of this can go along with it.
Yeah.
And so I think that, to me, is the most potent part of these kind of practices, and particularly Feldenkrais method, that everything else can go, but it's a very kind way. It's a very kind way to get there.
Yeah. I feel like, I'm thinking about that era with, Freud was a little bit earlier, but not much.
Yeah.
But this era of Ida Rolf and Fritz Perls and
Yeah.
Moshe, um, Erickson, these people hanging
Mhm.
around, everybody meeting up at Esalen in California and sharing ideas,
Yeah.
uh,
Magic time.
yeah, we owe a lot to that era of exploration, I guess, the human potential movement, as it's
Yes.
as it's sometimes called. Um, so you were just in London,
Mhm.
and I think you went to what, Krishnamurti's home or a school, or
Yes.
what
I
was
went to
tell
I went to Brockwood Park. So
okay.
they had dedicated a school where children can go study in the realm of experiential learning, which is Brockwood Park. Highly
Okay.
recommend anyone bring their child there. It is an amazing place. They're doing wonderful
So it's
things.
still, they still does that.
Still a boarding school.
I see.
And it's, in the English countryside, very scenic, very peaceful.
Mm.
And so there's the boarding school, Brockwood Park, and then there's the Krishnamurti Center, where one could go and just spend time contemplative way, just being,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and study the teachings of Krishnamurti. So this is the first time, particularly after the COVID era, that they offered this retreat for young adults, which was so popular. They'll be doing more of it because they just, in a way, in the last, I think, year or two, started to bring their presence more to the social media platforms of Instagram and YouTube. So now I think there's a lot more young people very interested in this work. of
Well, so Krishnamurti is sort of roughly on my radar, but not in a huge way. Can you just summarize just a little bit about his thinking and his impact on the
yes,
the world of
yes.
meditation,
Mhm,
consciousness, his
mhm.
kind of contribution?
Oh yes. So he was a philosopher.
Mhm.
Um, in the Theosophist Society, they had found him and said, "We'll take." He was maybe 14 at the time. Come with us. We're going to breed you to become this great Theosophist. The leader.
Mm.
And years later, he denounces this kind of title and this position. Society kind of crumbles from that. But they
Right.
had given him the house in Ojai. And I think maybe the center also kind of came for there's a place for children could learn in this kind of way. But he
Mm.
denounces this title because he was very interested in inclusivity, that everyone had access, that it wasn't just the theosophists, like not people just in the circle that had access to this kind of, discussions and knowledge. And he also really
And
denounced.
is there a meditation piece?
No, there's absolutely no meditation.
Okay,
So
I
he
see.
actually, in a way, didn't. His talks on meditation are absolutely fascinating. I'll send you them. But
Mm.
he's not interested in meditation. He's not
Okay.
interested in anything with any kind of accumulated knowledge. He believes that once there's accumulated knowledge, learning ends,
Stops. Yeah.
stops. And so it's very interesting because when this retreat was offered, and I'm on this retreat with like these young people from all over, and it's fascinating. It's very nice to be with them and have these discussions. But some of them, where I felt that there was a gap, and I was always the person because we'd had dialogue at the end of the day,
Oh, you were
and
that
we
person. Good.
yeah, but everyone would be like, but if the observer, and they would have these really big questions about the human condition and be in quite a duality state, but
Mhm.
none of them were rooted in experience.
Mm.
They were simply in this cognitive thinking that didn't really go anywhere. And
Mm.
I'm like, well, if you read the pamphlet, there are no answers. You're simply here to there's no accumulated knowledge that comes here.
Mm.
This is a place to just simply listen.
Mm.
And that's distinctly what he says, is that what is the process of retreat, that you could lose your heritage, you could for a moment lose who it is you think you are in the world, your family, XYZ, and simply be in a place of quiet to
Mm.
just listen. So he was very interested in order, in beauty. So like the whole place is just, the landscape is fantastic and there's so much natural beauty. So he believed that was really also an important part to learning. So his big thing was learning and the
Mhm.
conditions that kind of cultivated that, but in a way learning that, as Feldenkrais believed, was ever evolving and never ends,
Yeah, a non yeah,
and
open-ended process.
open-ended. Yeah. So
Yeah.
all of his discussions, he'll emphasize on the point that he calls himself the speaker, but he says, question the speaker. I'm not here to tell you anything. I'm not here to be prescriptive. I'm simply here to raise the questions. We're here as a society raising the questions. And that as soon as we have a sense of who we are, or like what we think we are, religion, XYZ, this is better than
Mhm.
that, then we've
Mhm.
created division in the world. And this is where all our human suffering comes from.
Difficulties arise. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was an interesting time. And maybe some have an idea of this. I mean, and some don't. I think even, we find that it's up to us to in a way keep our thinking expand, because it's like once there's the idea of I went to the Krishnamurti retreat, I feel peaceful, I
Yeah,
learned how
you
to,
got something.
I got something.
Right.
And that's what we're all used to. because that's what we went to school thinking. I mean, most of us went to
Yeah, you
these
got
schools.
your degree, you learned
Yes.
something, yeah, et cetera. Yeah.
And it doesn't actually serve us in any way. So it's going back to this curiosity and this expanded way that learning is.
I love that. So compatible with Feldenkrais. Now I'm seeing the connection
Yes,
much more clearly. Do you know did they know one another?
I believe they did. Yes. And I think in Elusive Obvious, he mentions Krishnamurti as well. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'll look that up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so speaking of which, so while you were there, you did your retreat, which sounds like it was cool and useful.
Very
and
cool. Yeah.
And you're still on the path. And then I think you did a workshop, and I liked your title. Didn't you call it an elusive kind of grace?
I
Right?
did.
A Feldenkrais workshop, which I liked this sort of the nod to one of Moshe's. I think it was his last book, The Elusive Obvious?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did that go?
It went great. I did it in a private residence. It was a very beautiful residence, my friend Rami's house, and it's just two small groups, so 6 people in the morning, 6 people in the afternoon, and I taught the 7th cervical from Man Ranch, and then I also taught the hand to heel lesson. I chose those lessons because, I mean, there was something in these lessons that I feel, at the end of a lesson, there's a really, and sometimes lessons like these where you feel yourself very tall can have like a real shock to people that I never sensed that in me before. What is that? The 7th cervical? Or and so they walk around and they're very much in shock. Oh, what is this? It's elusive. It's kind of graceful. And then hand to heel gave them a sense of dimensionality and moving from this place, and how one side could all of this, that there's so many different tastes to different lessons, and the two were quite different in the experience. And it's for a lot of the time I have people that have maybe heard but never experienced a lesson or never even heard of it before. And yeah, I could tell it's a very, my job or my interest is really facilitating that kind of quality for them to get, in a way, put aside what they think of that they've taken from other kind of classes, that they go to the end limit and bring them more back to, well, do you like the quality of your movement?
Right. Yeah. Always a good question. Does it feel good? Do you like
Are you enjoying yourself?
And,
can you find how to do that?
Quality, always a good word to lean into.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a curiosity for you. So, we're hopeful, God willing, we are less than a year. I sort of have this love-hate relationship with the Feldenkrais professional training, because it's really long. It's 4 years, and we spend a lot of time. And the love part is that, well, there's a lot of the hate part is that, it's a lot of travel and whatnot. But the love part is that, that's a lot of time for a lot to unfold. But where the end is in sight, so that's fun for us. So what I'm curious is, with your background, and I also know you travel in the art circles, partly in connection with your sister, but you told me about, maybe, I don't know if you're still affiliated with the hardcore punk scene in New York, but anyway, you've had a varied and interesting path, different communities. And then certainly, the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and a lot of the other movement and somatic work. Where are you hoping to go with this? Who are you wanting to work with? Where do you see this going? In your own teaching.
Yeah, I hear this sometimes, that you need to drive into your demographic. we're in a sense that I feel that I'm happy to work with many different people. But definitely who I've been working with in the last years have definitely been artists, people that work with their hands, painters, people that do clay, sculptors. So that's definitely been who I work with, and continues to gravitate towards me. And so definitely creatives. I work with creatives, and to me, this work and creativity are hand in hand. In a way, even if I was working with an office demographic, I'd still be very interested in them finding what it means to be creative. I think this is so related to the art of living, and so that creativity becomes something that is in a way moment by moment, that they can find that there's something different in the experience of themselves. So, I will continue facilitating and evolving group classes, and I think at the same time it will be more of the same type of people, but I'd be very much interested in seeing who else comes to the door. But again, I have the projects I'm working on, dynamic posture for artists, and working on that book will also strengthen in that my understanding of what it means to the self-use of an artist.
Sure.
And interpreting that and facilitating that something could be easier in their process. But again, everything is like, I could do this with carpenters, or,
Gardeners.
Yeah. Like I like to garden. I do that quite a bit. Gardening has gotten so easy for me.
Yeah.
I can feel that now, that there's definitely something different. So I like to play around, and it's, for me, I connect with many different people. As you said, I've been around different scenes. I could do it with Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and that as well. So I'm passionate about many things, and can see myself bringing this kind of work to different people.
Yeah. Well, and I'm remembering an earlier conversation we had, and where you were, you're kind of giving me a window into a little bit about, that some of your interest, and I'm just going to summarize, and then you're going to correct anything I miss, but that that you've a little bit had this lifelong, or from young days, interest in sort of, you've said it a few times here today, sort of the art of living, but also sort of like the art of living a whole lifespan, the art of being young, the art of being in one's middle years, the art of art of aging, the art of dying.
Yes.
And and there's some movement, I had never heard of it, but you said like the centenarian movement, or something like which longevity. And then you were sharing something so interesting. I can't remember what it was. Something about, I don't know if it was like people in Greece and they're walking up hills or something. But anyway, this has been an interest of yours, this idea of living gracefully during a whole lifespan. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think a lot of it has been my interest for a long time, but I also feel that it got even more of, to me, a subject of interest through bioenergetic work, a lot of the work of Alexander Lowen. Yes.
Yeah.
And to me, the bioenergetic work, that we can find ourselves throughout our formative years in different stages of our living, and bring that in without resistance. In the West, we're very much interested in alpha stage of living, that we're only useful in our alpha years, and we can't know ourselves.
And what is so that's a new term for me. So what is the alpha stage of living?
I would say alpha stage of living. When do people almost that? I think it's really maybe into your 40s. Like, when does the midlife crisis come? Like, probably around then, that people start to be like, I don't, I got the money, I got the job, I got the house, I got the whatever, but who am I? Right. And so much of this is like it was bred into our schooling that it's only, that in a way
that's the meaning of our life.
That's the meaning of our life, right? And so in this way, where I see these different lifestyles in the Mediterranean and the Okinawa, these blue zones, that people meet those later years in a much more graceful way, that they continue to, like, we don't see enough of our elderly population in the States, and I think I shared this with you, where Tom Myers was like, I went to go to the hospital to get some of my records for my parents that have deceased, and almost everything in the hospital now is death by this, death by liver, failure of this, that dying is a failure. And it's not necessarily seen like that in other places, that dying isn't a failure. It doesn't have to be.
You mean like heart failure, liver failure? That's how we define death, the failure of the body.
Failure of the body. But could it be something that is an evolution to another stage of being, not actually in a physical? So and I think, so the fear is a real thing in the West, that the fear to no longer be relevant, or no longer, that people
in the prime of health.
Yes, exactly. And so we see that dying is a struggle, and when we don't know much about our living, then we don't know much about our dying, and if we don't know much about our dying, we don't know much about our living. I think they go really hand in hand, this kind of way of, I think in other countries we might see, oh, she died peacefully in the garden, surrounded by family. But here it might be like, it was a struggle in the hospital, or it was a failure in the hospital.
Yeah, it was a battle, and then they finally
It was a battle, and people just died before. It didn't have to be a failure.
Yeah.
So I find this to be really interesting in a way. So when we can live our years and find ourselves in different stages of living, and find that our rhythm may not, I may not have the same energetic quality as I did in my 20s, but I'm finding myself at moment by moment in my mid 30s and then in my 40s, that I can truly live my inner rhythm, my biological rhythms that are true to me. I can find that we slow down, but that's the slowing down also brings some kind of exquisite moment by moment sense that we can enjoy. We're less fast. So I'm also really interested in circadian rhythm and all of this kind of.
Sure. Well, that may be part of I saw your well, we don't need to get into Huberman, but but we're learning a lot about circadian rhythms.
Circadian rhythms.
Andrew Huberman,
So Lowen's been also just a really, in the bioenergetic work's been really also profoundly important to me in terms of that, the emotional body and is very much.
Well, just to talk, I guess, talking about Lowen for a second, and I feel like I feel like he's somebody who's underappreciated. I mean, so Alexander Lowen was sort of a successor to Wilhelm Reich, was sort of the guy who was sort of a student of Freud's, and then Reich brought in the concept of body armor, that some of our ego structure from Freud's perspective shows up as muscular tension patterns in the body, but then Lowen really ran with that. To me, he was such an amazing experimentalist in terms of the things that he tried in his clinical work, and a point that you and I can, because I don't know many other people who have read all of Alexander Lowen's books except for you. So it was fun for me that we connected on that. But anybody listening, go check out, shoot, I'm trying to remember, what are some of his major titles, like the voice of the body?
Yes, pleasure is one of my favorites, because that word has such a stigma, and the book is so exquisite. and then there's what else are
Well,
there's
there's the voice of the body. There's
language
joy.
of the body,
Yeah, language of the body,
the weight
joy.
of vibrant health.
Right.
There's
I don't know. There's probably about a dozen. We should know the title.
yes.
We should know the titles a little bit better. But what's so cool is what I like about him is how many sort of clinical stories there are, examples.
Yes.
Where for me as I'm a little more than a decade into doing body work and the related things, and it's like, I've been a part of a lot of deep processes with people over the years, and it's wonderful. That's what really brings this work alive for me, is the kinds of transformation and things that happen with the people that I work with. But something that frustrates me is that all those things happen, and I sometimes lose track of them. Like I kind of, they're there in my memory banks, but they're not right there. But what I think Lowen did such a great job at is really capturing his process around, and he was someone, I think, who didn't exactly have a fixed view. I mean, he had a hypothesis, which is that we need to work with the energies in the body in order to support vitality, flow, human living. But I don't think he had a totally fixed view. And so what comes through is just, the stories of transformation, what he learned in a directly experiential way. And I think anybody who's involved in somatic work these days, maybe we don't have to become bioenergetics therapists, because, it's his work still exists that way. But I think that simply his writing has so much, and it sounds like it really impacted you in that way as well.
Very, very much. And I think a little bit of, I think of like the bioenergetic realm, and I might even think a little bit of somatic experiencing, the work you do, where both of them really touch on the emotional life of a person. Where in Feldenkrais, I don't think we're necessarily going there. That happens, but we're not going there necessarily directly.
Right. It can happen, but we're not seeking it out. We're not even really asking about it. Particularly, somebody might, of course, share, but you're right. It's present, but it's not the central focus.
Indirect. And that's the beauty of the method. It's very indirect. Your shoulder hurts, but we're going to go to your hip, or like, there's an indirectness to the method. And we're like, I think in these kind of modalities like bioenergetics and somatic experiencing, in a way, there's the addressing of the body. Like in bioenergetics, there might be like discharge. All right. He had, like you said, there wasn't just one way he was working with people, and each story had like a completely complex way of looking. But the idea of this, we in a way contract or harden these places, and in order to have feeling come back into these places, that there could be this whole circulatory kind of thing, is that we open up the emotion. How it is they get there sometimes could be more rigorous than other times.
Right. What gets to them there? Yeah, exactly.
Where, from my understanding in somatic experiencing, and I've joined some workshops before, and I may be interested in actually adding it in my tool belt, just because of course, like, we can't not also address emotions as they come up, and it would be nice to have. I think it's very complementary to the Feldenkrais. And so what would you say might be some distinctions there in a way?
I totally agree with you that they're complementary. So many things are complementary, but they really are. I think what I think where Feldenkrais really shines is it's addressing the nervous system, both the voluntary nervous system, and then because of the careful attention to refining and developing careful, sensitive awareness of movement through the voluntary motor system, it has the effect very much of supporting the parasympathetic nervous system in the balancing of our autonomic system, the balance. And so there's a similarity with somatic experiencing or with TRE. The more explicit goal is, how do we optimize the regulation within the autonomic nervous system? And I don't think that idea was as clearly present during Moshe's time. So he developed a method that very much does that thing of helping to create better balance in the autonomic states.
Yes.
But I rarely do I see that articulated as the goal in Feldenkrais. Whereas in somatic experiencing, the what's being looked at, so we use voluntary movement, so movement is a part of somatic experiencing, but not at all in the careful, studied, refined way that's happening in Feldenkrais. But it's so the area of interest is more what would influence the set point of your autonomic nervous system to move in the direction of greater capacity, more safety, registering safety, and therefore more access to our, what's called the ventral vagal nervous system or the social engagement nervous system. So because we have sort of these newer theories, we can be a little more specific around how do we get the autonomic state to settle. And in SC, you're sometimes using movement, but you're sometimes using breath. You're sometimes, which is in common with Feldenkrais. But where it differs is we're also using felt sense, which we use in Feldenkrais, but in SE we ask a lot more about it. So if I was sitting here with you, Niki, I'd say, okay, so you moved your neck a few times, great. And now, what are you sensing? How was it to move your neck? Maybe you have some language. And then, and now what are you noticing? And now what are you noticing? Tell me a little bit more about that. So there's this almost like this sustained interest in what's the next sensation that arises. And then very much included in SE is and is that a positive feeling? Is it neutral? Is there an emotional tone to that? Is there not? If so, bringing curiosity towards the emotional tone. Is there a story behind it? Did this remind you of something? So that dialoguing piece of it is present in SE, and it's where, in a different way than in Felde. But because they're both working with the body and the nervous system, I just see them as being kind of like a hand in glove.
Very complementary.
Yeah.
Very much. And in a way that, like, from what I've observed in SC, when I've sat into these workshops and seeing them work with different people in terms of bringing them into that time or that kind of traumatic event, and then bringing them exactly to their felt sensation, and then suggesting that there could maybe be another sensation. But in a way, it brought them a resolve that the nervous system doesn't always have to react in that same way when there could be a different way, right? So it's like, in a way with like Feldenkrais, it's all about the possibilities, right? That there are different possibilities. And Feldenkrais says, if you only have one way to do something, then it's not learning. You need at least 10 different ways. I'm like, wow, 10 different ways. Like,
right. Yeah, he really challenges us to not be stuck with a habit, even if we think that habit works pretty well. We're still limited if it's our only choice. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so cool. What have we not? I feel what have we not circled on? What do we need to feel complete with our conversation?
Well, I would check, like, I feel pretty satisfied in the, is that a felt sense?
Great question. You're right. Yeah, if you feel satisfied, and
Yeah.
if you're being honest, then yes,
Mhm.
I'd say that's a felt sense thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I feel pretty satisfied too. And we're a week away from being in Canada again. So I'm really valuing this conversation just as a little bit of a warm up
Yes.
for being in class again for 2 weeks
Yes.
and getting to do another deep dive
Mhm.
with us and our classmates. So, well, Niki, thank you so very much for joining. And yeah, this was lovely. And maybe hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
It's been a pleasure, Alex. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.